The Simple Life is a 3D animation created primarily within Blender targeting young adults to explore the connections between artificial intelligence and humanity and its possibilities and impossibilities. It uses visual storytelling to emphasize this narrative and craft an emotional impact, prompting viewers to question what defines and separates us as humans. The production of my project can be divided into 7 main stages. Firstly, planning. I began by compiling inspiration that I sourced from Pinterest and Google that influenced various aspects of my project, including my character and environment design. Using this, I created basic storyboards and sketches to better visualize my intentions. Next, with these plans, I undertook the design of my character within Blender. I first blocked out the basic humanoid shapes and unique elements of its figure. Next, I added more detail and additions to the simplified model with the intention of creating depth and interest. For the legs, I chose to use a robotic version of digitigrade legs used by cats and dogs to create the appearance of the robot being hybrid and unique. However, for ease of animation, I kept basic human arms and hands for interaction with elements. In texturing, I first defined a color palette that complemented the mood of my project. For this, I chose blue, orange lights, and 2 different grays for mechanical elements. Next, I chose the material properties of individual elements, with the majority being metallic or plastic. I used an aircraft door image texture to add detailed variation and decals to my character, making the robot appear more constructed from scraps rather than new and original. To add realism, I used a concrete image texture to add wear, rough areas, and overall damaged appearance, using displacement and a bump node with a normal map. Next, I modeled the assets and models that my project required, adding the highest level of detail to the elements that we positioned in the foreground, used in simulations or interacted with during animation. For this step, I used a variety of modeling techniques such as 3D scans or photogrammetry, modifiers including subdivision, submotion, Boolean, beveling, proportional editing, loop cuts, and sculpting. To simulate nature, I used a scatter tool to populate my scene with the plants of various sizes and shapes I had modeled. This allowed me to skip the time-consuming step of individually placing small objects all over the ground and selecting each to make small changes. To create the forest scenes, I added a plane that I sculpted as the ground with various brushes to give it a natural appearance, then populated it with low vertex count plants and foliage. I then textured this and added environmental lighting and volumetric fog to achieve a realistic appearance. To create larger scale forest scenes, I used a particle system that scattered images of trees across a landscape. To make these images interact with the scene's lighting, I created a 3D model of a tree and rendered it as a mask, color, and normal. This allowed me to render large forests without causing performance issues and greatly increasing render times. Using geometry nodes, I was able to create a procedural vine generator that I could use with the Draw Curve on Surface tool within Blender to add vines to anything within my scene. Additionally, this 13-node setup allowed me to easily customize and alter the width, scale, and density of the vine and its leaves. In lighting my scenes, I used various light sources including area lights, spotlights, point lights, sunlights, and emissive objects. This allowed me to create an interesting while well-lit environment that, when mixed with smoke simulations, volumetrics created a dynamic ambience. I mainly employed the use of the 3-point light photography principle. This uses a primary light, a fill light to soften shadows, and finally a backlight to separate the subject from the background. To animate my character, I first created a custom meta rig and a parent system for ease of process, and while I experimented with kinematics, I ultimately decided against their use. I used the graph editor within Blender to change interpolation modes of my keyframes to create smooth movements using Beziers. However, this has to be used in moderation as my character, as a robot, needed to have rigid and mechanical movements to emphasize this factor. When rendering my project, I chose to use between 70 and 100 samples, as well as a relatively low noise threshold. I found this to be the ideal spot between efficiency or performance and time. Additionally, to maximize the efficiency of the rendering process, I used batch renders, which allowed me to render multiple files and therefore scenes without having to touch my computer. To do this, I wrote a simple script in a Windows batch file, executed this whenever my computer was left unattended for extended periods of time. Finally is the post-production stage. Here I compiled my project, added color correction, audio, overlays, and other effects. Overall, my project effectively demonstrates a high level of difficulty and the incorporation of a wide variety of skills, tools, and techniques.